1747 hours, August 29th, 2555. Sol System, Earth, Sydney, Australia. HiCom Facility Bravo 6, The Hive. ONI Section 3 Gamma 4 Division Special Access Projects, Joint Division Material Sciences. So in conclusion, it's a well-established truth that the dual processing between an AI core matrix and a biological brain can be easily facilitated. The SNI in particular has the redundant nodes and cerebral cortex interfaces to ensure the AI has the processing power it needs to run at nominal power. But that isn't the aim of our research. The reality is that AIs can process information thousands of times faster and more accurately than even the greatest minds in history. That's why they're so useful. But the weak link in the system is always going to be the biological brain. Our research is already yielding positive results for neural digitization, and it's the very nature of digital circuits transmitting signals close to the speed of light that makes them so much faster and more efficient than their electrochemical counterparts. It's because of this that our research is now at a critical turning point. We have addressed previous issues with processing compatibility errors, and thanks to the emerging technological advances we have made as of late, we are now in a position to ramp this up to full human trials. Vladimir finished, breathing a silent sigh of relief. He looked through the powerful spotlight he and his 3 associates stood under, attempting to see the faces of the 3 high-ranking officers that sat at the curved table ahead of him. The room was a near-perfect circular room. The floor was clad with rubberized matte black tiling and the walls were clad in rich, polished mahogany. In most circumstances, the air would be lightly tinged by the characteristic scent of this wood, but the air in this room smelled sterile and with a slight metallic taste, indicating the room's atmosphere was recycled. The walls also muffled and deadened sound in such a way as to make you feel as though your ears had popped. Vlad even occasionally found himself opening and rotating his jaw to try to make them pop, but to no avail. There was no sign of the door Vlad, Victor, Flynn and Holly had come through. It had slid quietly close behind them around 7 hours ago, so perfectly it didn't even leave a seam. The room was this way for one very simple and important reason. It was a debriefing room deep within the bowels of a military facility designed to be perfectly sealed and isolated from the outside world in every way it could be. The pressure of being in such a space for this many hours made even the hardest of people uneasy. But having now spent a total of 18 hours over 4 sessions in this room, he was eager to get outside, under an open sky, where things were simpler. It reminded him of days spent in research with his team at the colony of Colo, but that was a memory long since past. The subject matters that had been discussed were considered highly sensitive information, and as such, the financiers of this particular research project deemed it necessary to take such heavy security measures. Vlad could make out some movement in the darkness, beyond the powerful haze. He was certain they were talking quietly amongst themselves, but the room devoured the sound before it reached his ears. Finally, after what felt like an hour, but was likely only a few minutes, in perpetual silence, someone sat at the table, cleared their throat. Vlad took that as a sign and attempted to make direct eye contact with the source of the voice, Vice Admiral Anthony Rogers. An elderly man, but in fantastic condition, his dark hair had long since silvered, his cool blue eyes fixed on the 4 highly talented research scientists stood in front of the table he and 2 others sat at. His crisp uniform was just visible under the dim light upon the tabletop. An impressive array of medals and ribbons lay on his chest, demonstrating his own highly successful career in the UNSC. In your report, you outlined the cognitive impression modeling process that is used to create AI cores from biological brains of deceased donors. It was my understanding that the process destroys the biological brain, Vice Admiral Rogers inquired. Victor took a moment and then answered, in his British drawl, "It does, but thanks to the involvement of the team at REAP-X and XEG and the classified materials they've had access to, we were able to reverse engineer the technology and develop a different process, much slower, and uses lower amperage pulses of energy to align a biologically inert superconducting nanoparticulate Rather than destroying the neural pathways, microscopic superconducting tendrils begin to develop on the molecular scale within the neurons themselves. The slower speed and lower electrical energy means that the neurons remain completely intact and act as a template for the superconducting tendrils. And the result of the superconducting fibers? What happens once the process is finished? Rogers asked. Vlad cleared his throat. At the moment, we don't know for certain. But based on our current findings and the demonstrated abilities of Spartan 117 and the UNSC AI Cortana in that's classified, a deep voice snapped. Vlad paused and reconsidered. We believe we could augment this newly formed network with peripheral nanomatrix-based integrated systems, adding even more functionality to the dual processing system. It should allow the AI core matrix to communicate with the biological brain without the need for digital to electrochem converters, basically making it so the human AI dual processing allows the pair to undertake tasks at speeds closer to that of digital circuitry. It could mean a huge leap in the processing speeds of the subject in question. Rear Admiral Aiden Venko listened to Vlad's response, running his calloused fingers over the long scar running from his forehead across one eye and down to his cheek, finished by rubbing his stubble against the grain. All I heard from that was you don't know. You don't know? He demanded. Venko's voice boomed in the small conference room. He was a tall, broad and stern-looking man, middle-aged and battle-hardened, his hair cropped short, wearing an impeccable naval officer's black uniform adorned with campaign ribbons and medals from nearly 2 decades he had served on the front line. Aiden fixed Vlad with a condescending glare. Vlad was by no means a small man himself, at 6'2", with a body condition honed by years of hard graft and labour-intensive work. He knew he could handle himself, but Aiden was also a very large man. Vlad wasn't so much concerned over his size than his influence. Being a high-ranking officer within the Office of Naval Intelligence, he carried with him the reputation of ONI of being a shady intelligence and counterintelligence agency associated with the United Nations Space Command. People who negatively crossed ONI often disappeared without a trace. It was that power which had Vlad on edge. Holly spoke with appropriate humility. The process isn't complete yet. We are working with simulations and small-scale trials with animal grey matter. The accuracy to human tissues isn't fully realised. Holly's small frame was not indicative of her personality. A slim woman of average height and build, her long straight blonde hair was kept up in a loose, messy ponytail, as her hair falling in her eyes while she was working was a pet peeve of hers. So you don't know for certain that it can even be done with humans, Aiden bit. No, Victor interjected, briefly taking the heat of Aiden's focus. We know it can be done. Don't get me wrong, the simulations are highly accurate and the error checking performed by Petrus, the AI assisting us, confirms that it can be done within a margin of error of less than 0.04%. It's nothing short of academic, but actually performing it on human tissue is the problem. You need a brain, Rogers surmised. Yes, Vlad breathed. And what's the problem with the donor brains for the AI program? Aiden sighed. They're already dead, Victor flatly responded. A still, icy silence fell upon the room, a silence that Flynn found intolerable. Flynn was a tall, lean man with a South African twang in his voice. For all our advancements in technology, especially during wartime, we still can't fully explain the philosophy behind consciousness, and as such, once someone has died, they're dead. Permanently, Flynn spoke, attempting to redeem Victor's bluntness. I don't deal in uncertainties and philosophies, we deal with fact and nothing more. You need the brain of a living person? Use a flash clone, Aiden snapped. Vlad raised his voice slightly. We end up with the same issue, sir. A flash clone brain doesn't exhibit consciousness in the conventional sense, and the accelerated process of development leaves the brain prone to discrepancies. No human brain is spotless. Nobody is perfect, Aiden spat. True, but those natural irregularities we can compensate for. The errors in the flash clone are systemic and far outside our tolerable limits for margin of error, Holly informed. Aiden boiled. Your tolerable limit? What about ours? We are funding this endeavour, and you made it clear this could be done, and it can be, sir. but I'm not willing to trial this technique on a substandard copy and deliver mistaken results to the board. Otherwise, when, and it is a when, something goes wrong, it'll be my head a target is painted on, Vlad interrupted. You interrupt me again and you won't make it to when. So let's get this clear. Sims aren't good enough, animal samples aren't good enough, donor brains aren't good enough, flash clone brains aren't good enough. We have thrown everything that you've needed to do this research at you. We've spent enough credits to fund a small colony, and now you're telling us, what, you've reached a bottleneck in your research, that there's no way to progress any further? Why didn't you foresee this exact issue at the start and make it clear back then rather than string us along and feed us shit in your reports? That's enough, Aiden. A calm but powerful female voice spoke. Mr. Sokolov, while I appreciate your concerns in regards to the accuracy of the process, to my ears, you are requesting a living host. Admiral Trudy James accurately guessed. Admiral James looked late middle-aged. Her hair was cropped in silver and styled conservatively, but certainly marginally outside of regulation. Her face didn't bear noticeable wrinkling or fatigue that is customary with long service officers of the UNSC, and instead looked well-rested, full of life and deceptively young. Vlad nearly responded but held his tongue, first noticing that the question was wholeheartedly rhetorical, and then nearly choking on the gravity of the situation he was nearly agreeing to. The UN colonial mortal dictator made it abundantly clear that it was completely and utterly illegal to perform any human experimentation. Openly requesting Oni defy this law was a very, very risky move, even though Vlad knew enough about Oni to know that they don't play by the book, because there is no one higher than them to tell them otherwise, and that's exactly why it was so risky. You want a volunteer, she pushed. No, Vlad reflexively blurted out. No, she countered, calling his bluff. Well, Admiral James held up a hand to silence whatever it was he was about to say, and took a deep breath. You argue that a flash clone is outside of acceptable parameters, that simulations and animal substitutes are not accurate enough, but are unwilling to take a living host. I understand your hesitation, given that publicly the use of living specimens for experimental medical procedures is illegal as per the mortal dictator. While your research is of great interest to Oni, and while we have made significant progress, we are still a way off of being fully willing to be able to put all our cards on this particular table. So in the interests of not drawing unnecessary attention to this project, allow me to make the decision for you. You will use flash clone brains to further your testing to proof of concept. At this stage, there isn't enough promise that would warrant me sticking my neck out for you and getting you live meat. It will be duly noted that we should expect errors, but the only way you can further your research and continue to be useful to us is to accept the flash clones and be grateful for the continued employment. But Mom, you will do this and you will report to us weekly until we are satisfied all efforts have been made to push forward this research. If you continue to be as productive and innovative as you have been, you have nothing to worry about. Or you can continue resistance, and when you leave this room, your contract will be terminated, funding pulled, non-disclosure agreement and gag orders in place, and you will be redeployed on a backwater colony in a dead-end academic research post for the rest of your natural life, asserted Admiral James, growing ever more tired of the debate. Vlad nodded a silent and reluctant response. Admiral James softened her stern expression and lowered her tone. Mr. Sokolov, you and your team were handpicked for this position because you have pushed the fields of human-computer interface forward more than any 3 of our private sector contractor companies combined. You are well suited to this position, but do not mistake the reality that we, as a species, are facing extraordinarily difficult times. Only the UNSC and the UEG are desperately trying to re-establish ourselves now the war is over, and rebolster our forces in any way we can. We have precious little resources and precious little time to be wasting on dead-end research, and if you are found to be wasting it, you are not indispensable. Thank you for your time, ma'am, sirs, Vlad responded for himself and his colleagues. Admiral James dipped her head, giving permission to leave, and at that the 4 turned and moved to the exit. The door sheathed open, and they were hit with the powerful, harsh white lighting of the corridor beyond. They moved through and began the long 20-minute walk through the underground facility, passing through various security stations and escorted by armed guards, until they were at the lobby of the ONI facility. They exited back onto the streets of Sydney. The city was a high-rise modern 26th century city, but it had seen some horrific times. Truth be told, it was nothing but rubble as recently as a few years earlier. The Covenant had found Earth in 2552, and while they were focused on the Ark Portal in East Africa, they didn't completely ignore population centres across the globe. Sydney was just one such place they decided to attack while they were passing through. The war came to its end in 2553, and in only 2 years the city of Sydney was rapidly being rebuilt. Designed in a simple yet elegant utilitarian design, indicative of an inner colony world, all metal cladding, steel structure and glass, monochromatic in colour and punctuated by hard angles and geometric symmetry. The facility, known as the Hive, that they had just come from, had been spared completely, owed in no small part by the fact that the facility was protected by massive glass plating nearly 3 kilometres underground. It was a fortress of unparalleled strength and resilience, no mean feat against the Covenant's full might. "I need a drink," Victor said. The others didn't respond so much as they simply grunted in agreement and followed his lead. They had spent the last 18 hours in the facility fully debriefing 3 ONI officers on the ONI-funded research and development project. It was classified so highly it might as well not have existed at all. The area around the Hive was highly militarised, as it was the centre of operations for the entire UNSC. But after a walk of a few city blocks, the normal civilian lifestyle won out. The quartet ambled, nearly defeated, into an old-style microbrewery, a stark and antiquated contrast to the ultra-modern utilitarian design outside. The bar was all but empty, just a few of the regular barflies hanging off of their chairs like a bad smell. Victor, Holly and Flynn found a quiet corner, while Vlad ordered 4 pints of their locally crafted casked ale. He tapped his credit chip on the bar, paid for the drinks, and retreated to the booth the others had acquired. They sat in silence for a few minutes, staring blankly at the cold, perspiring glasses on the table in front of them. Finally, with a deep intake of breath, Vlad lifted his glass to his lips and took a single, long draw of the amber-coloured ale, and as he placed the glass back down and felt it fall directly onto his empty stomach, somehow the single mouthful of alcohol was enough to allow the weight and tension he currently carried in his shoulders to melt and fall away. "Well, that was good, wasn't it?" he said with as much sarcastic enthusiasm as he could muster. Victor looked at him and held his gaze for a few moments, not blinking, and then cracked a cheeky smile. "Yeah, we ain't dead," he replied. "I dunno," Flynn gestured to the elderly, rose-flushed face peering over the bar. "The bartender looks like he could be undercover. You checked these drinks before you brought them over?" "Hell, if they wanted us dead, we wouldn't have made it to the lobby," Holly rather correctly surmised. "Nah," Vlad interjected. "You could have held them back for us while we got out of there. No stopping you when you get going." The group laughed at the internal joke. The 4 had been friends for the better part of 2 decades, but during that time, even the best of friends can disagree. Couple that with a highly charged environment of an innovations business, they had their fair share of fallings out. Over the next 2 hours, the group retold stories and memories they had shared over the years. While the conversation started in humour, it soon changed to a more sombre tone. The 4 had first met in university, where they studied cybernetic and human augmentation technologies. They quickly established themselves as highly gifted in these particular fields. Once they had finished their studies, they went travelling through the inner colony worlds and found their way to Colo in 2534, a highly powerful economy and greatly influential among the inner colony worlds. This thriving economy was one of the attractions. They set up a small research company, continued their research and gained the attention of the UNSC. The team were acquisitioned by ONI to lead up some highly classified research projects, an opportunity they were initially hesitant to accept as it deviated from their desire to remain independent and focus on their own research. Accepting the offer from ONI was basically giving up their company and going to a research position, but with none of the flexibility or independence they once had. They reluctantly accepted because you don't say no to ONI. They were taken on as civilian contractors, which meant that ONI were hiding something, true to form if nothing else. The rest, as they say, is history. Their conversation came to a flat end. They had over the years forgotten about their independent lives and had fallen into the research ONI had set them. Gradually they realised, due to the huge funding budgets and specialised materials they had access to, they could develop technology that could help end the war with the Covenant. They developed various technologies for various applications, including specialised weapon systems, certain components which were implemented into the Mjolnir-powered assault armour, the iconic armour worn by the legendary Spartan IIs, and more recently they were focusing on cybernetic and augmentations technology. Today was their first time in nearly a decade that they had spoken about their pasts, and they missed it. Deeply. They missed the simplicity. Demoralised by the negativity that their stories had resulted in, they sat in silence for 20 minutes, drinking the last of their 4th round. Holly finally broke the silence. So what's our next steps?